So, folks, NIL is still the wild, wild west. It still makes very little sense to me. I've always been a skeptic. I have cautious optimism in the whole idea of it all, but I have a lot of questions, and there is no shortage of controversy because, like I said, it is the wild, wild west, and I am certainly no expert. So I brought in an expert. Once again, it was the wild, wild west when we had this conversation long ago, and it's still the wild, wild west. So there's still plenty to talk about. But he is the expert, head of On3 Elite, Grant Frerking. Okay, Grant, there's a lot of controversy about NIL right now because people don't understand a lot about it unless you're really into it. But I know you're a big advocate for it, and you talk about how, athletes, they should invest their money. They should be smart with it. It's an incredible opportunity that it provides. A lot of people think it's due to them to be able to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. And most people would agree with that in concept. But things have gotten funky. They've gotten wild. They've gotten to an extreme where some people are like, okay, we need to rein this in, if not eliminate it altogether. Now, I know that you're definitely in the camp of we still need it and we got to have it. But does it need reform?
Sure. The question is loaded there because I think if you look at where this space has gone since 2021, when all this came about, and you got to go through like what are the phases we've landed in. We've gone through, athletes going to the local pizza shop in their college town and, getting some cash and a free meal here and there. You've gone to these collectives who, have been these umbrella LLCs that these donors have been able to pump millions of dollars into to go and, stroke a check to the athletes and, under disguise of pay for play, but pay for play, was the term you could never use. And now you're walking into a phase where everyone knows it's pay for play. You truly can go in the portal, in football, and basketball, you can go in the portal twice a year, at two different times. You can go in December and you can go in April. And, whether you're actually going into or not, I mean, you call it a publicity stunt or whatever you want. You can just go and threaten to go in, leverage, a collective down or a coach down and shake them down for more money every single year. And you've seen that with these guys, right? And now I think, you've seen some of these collectives and schools stand their ground and, try to recoup some of the money that they've poured into these guys when they've been on campus for maybe 6 months and they're already trying to jump ship, right? But when you talk about, reform, I've always been, a proponent of NIL at its core, but I've also been a proponent of having structure around it, right? If you're going to go pay an 18-year-old high 6 or 7 figures, that kid in some cases, is going to be making money that, him, folks in his family, more money than they've ever seen in their, generational lifetime, right? And so if you're going to give a 17, 18-year-old kid that much money, heck, I know what I was doing with that much money, when I was, 17, 18-year-old walking the strip in Knoxville, Tennessee. What are these kids going to do now when they can go and get 7 figures annually and then go in the portal and go get a signing bonus multiple times in their careers, right? So, when I say structure, I think you've seen street agents, you've seen 7-on-7 coaches, you've seen family best friends all try to represent these athletes. And what the sad part about it is you're starting to see some of these kids, in my opinion, get exploited for who they are. I mean, you got agents, leveraging and shopping around their players. Hey, if I were to put my kid in the portal, how much could he get at this school? And the kid has no idea their agent's even shopping them around, and they're still midway through the season. Not even in a time where they should be thinking about this, and their agent's out there shopping it around. Stuff gets leaked, stuff gets reported. And so, loaded answer to your question is I think we're at a time where, in the next 60 days, there could be a possibility that, the CFO and treasurer at these institutions, the same one that are cutting, $1 million checks to the head coaches, are now going to be cutting checks to their 18-year-old students, right? The same ones that are walking to class with kids that are paying their tuition, they're going to be getting a check from the school for this significant money. Like, how does that shape up, and how do these kids take it from there?
Many questions. So I want you to explain the portal to somebody who knows nothing about college sports and nothing about NIL and nothing about the portal. Because when I hear you, and I know, I know enough to know what it is, and I know enough to know the news reports about it and people entering the portal. But to people like me, who, when I say like me, I mean like women in their early 30s who don't actually care that much about college sports. When you say the portal, my mind thinks of like Halloween Town entering the portal. I'm like, oh, well, that sounds like a Disney movie to me.
Quite different from that.
Yeah, it sounds different. But explain what the portal is to those who have no idea what the portal is.
Sure. Look, people have all these mixed reviews about the transfer portal and how many times it should open up for kids to be able to have that window to transfer. And look, I think there's certainly times in a career, where you should have the opportunity to be able to transfer. There's circumstances of a coach leaving, a coach retiring, and you committed to that school because of the coach. Something happened in your career there and it's just not a good fit. But the idea of transferring solely because of money, is so far-fetched in this day and age. I mean, I'm a traditionalist. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. All 4 of us, had the opportunity. We're fortunate enough to go play a sport in college. And I remember, watching all my siblings, sit on the couch with my parents, and a college coach would come into our house. My mom would cook a huge home-cooked meal, and, it was truly relational. These coaches would spend massive amounts of time, energy, effort, resources to fly into these towns, sit down on these couches, go watch. You're a football player, but during the wintertime, coach would come watch your basketball game, at your local high school. And, that was the beautiful part about, what makes college athletics. I think, if you look big picture, I think you see what's the reason some of these coaches are starting to get a little tired or starting to retire a little early. College athletics, you're developing these young men and women and shaping them for their careers, whether it's playing at the next level professionally or, making better men and women to go out and lead whenever careers they leave after college. And so now it's just become, I have 2 windows every single year to go try to get more money. And it's become a money grab because now, every state, almost, I would say 80% are now legal NIL at the high school level. So kids are able to start, getting paid, 16, 17 years old. And then they have multiple windows every year to transfer all throughout college, and it's on top of grad transfer years. And so, if you just take football and men's basketball, probably the 2 most lucrative, sports, as we know, revenue-wise, but also where the most amount of NIL dollars are flowing, you have 2 windows. You can go play throughout a year. Let's say you're a freshman and you land on campus, at the end of May. You graduate. It's Memorial Day weekend. You got to report to campus, right at the beginning of June. You can go all throughout summer, play that season. And let's say you're a standout or you don't play at all and you're not happy, you have a window to go transfer right after the season in December. It's probably the heaviest hitting transfer portal window because it's after the season, emotions are running high, whether you had a great season, poor season. You can transfer, and then 4 months later, April opens up right at the end of spring ball, and you can go transfer again. And there's no repercussion. So you could you can recruit these kids and, develop an extreme relationship with them, think things are great, and they can just leave you overnight. And I think that's what's so hard about, being a coach in this day and age is it's not necessarily recruiting the kids to come to your school. You must have to spend more time, energy, and effort retaining them to stay on your roster because while you're out on the recruiting trail, trying to get the next batch of kids onto your team, into your school, your guys are getting shopped around and tampered with by every school in the country trying to get them to come transfer. And that can happen twice a year. I mean, it's truly hard to keep up with it. And then you talk about building culture and all the different things. I mean, it's just virtually impossible now.
It feels like this is going to be, people liked college sports because it didn't feel like pro sports. So for a lot of people, this is ruining the experience for them.
Sure.
Now, I'm not one of those people that thinks that these athletes should be exploited and making all this money for their athletic programs and getting none of it because that's exploitive. And I don't like that. And I think that you should get some of it.
Yeah.
The extent of what they're getting, that seems like a lot. I'll tell you too, you mentioned the culture.
Yeah.
So do you think that it's destroying like that school spirit in a way? I'm going to give you an example. I talked to my husband about this because he played baseball at Tennessee. And he loves the Tennessee Vols so much, and it's vol. I
already know I would like him.
So so that's like his whole. Even though he played professionally and all this, he ask him what he's most loyal to. He's most loyal to the Tennessee Vols, and he told me, listen, if I went to Tennessee from Miami and I had a bad season or I didn't like the coach, and I would call home and tell my mom, okay, I'm going to transfer, she would say, like hell you are.
For sure.
So he said, you stick it out and it teaches you to stick it out, to deal with personalities, to persevere, to have loyalty to your school, the school that took a chance on you. And NIL is kind of destroying that.
Sure. So that's always been a question since NIL started. Is it destroying the locker room? Is it destroying culture? Is it destroying the college experience? They've always called it amateurism. And, that's what kind of NIL ruled out. I think now more than ever, when you talk about ruining culture, it's not necessarily the dollars. Hey, Tomi, I found out you're making this and I'm making that, and I'm pissed off because I'm playing double the amount you are, but I know what you're making, and I know I'm not making that, right? That's not destroying it. I think what's destroying it, which is actually, I think, pretty substantive, is a lot of these guys are like, man, we're spending this entire year building culture, trying to get our team ready to go, play in the SEC or whatever conference it might be. And, you got guys on board. They're part of leadership councils on the team. They're, in these positions of leadership within their locker room. And overnight, they can just disappear. I mean, truly, you could be teammates with someone, play in a spring game with them. And by Sunday, when the transfer portal windows, you might never see them again. And they're going and transferring to a school you might play next year. Mm-hmm. And, I think that at its core and at the essence of that is what's destroying, if anything, the culture of it. I don't think it's the transactional dollar amounts that are going around the locker room. Heck, if the House settlement passes in July, the school's going to be paying the athletes directly. So if it was destroying a locker room now, heck, it's gonna fully blow it over come July. If FOIA requests can happen, you can know exactly down to the dollar amount what all these kids are making. But that kind of, if you walk back and just look at like where we stand as a whole right now as a sport, people always thought NIL was going to destroy college football. Why your husband loves Tennessee is the same reason that I love Tennessee, and why I would much rather go to a college football game than an NFL game, right? Because you have vested interest in that school. Whether him as a former baseball player there went there and loves everything Tennessee, or an average student that graduated from the engineering college, they have vested interest. They spent 4 years plus or minus at that university. They paid tuition dollars. They spent every weekend in that town, and they're excited to bring their family back there, bring their kids back there. They want their kids to go to school there. And I think that's what makes college football. I mean, heck, in the NFL, you don't have marching bands. You don't see tailgates like you see in college. Like, you don't see the spirit around it of the alumni base that have vested interest in that university. I think that's what makes college football special. And you look at a sport, you look at these TV deals that are getting done across the board, the sport's growing at an incredible rate. I mean, more people are watching college football than they ever have been. You have the college football playoff last year, the expansion, you have betting. I mean, you have all these factors that have, poured gasoline into this fire, which is college football. And I mean, any athletic department personnel would know too. I mean, college football is king. It changes the economy of every single local college town for those, 8 weeks that they have home games. It transforms a fan base, and it's not just football, but sports as a whole. But I remember Tennessee, we made the college football playoff this year, and, would that energize the university as a whole? Yeah. It was tremendous. When we beat Alabama 2 years ago, that was my last year playing, back in 22, college application rates doubled. I mean, the amount of kids wanting to come to Tennessee from New York and California and Florida because they see what's happening on TV. They see the storm the field and all the different things.
And they see people storming the field because they're excited about football, not storming the field because they're excited about Hamas.
Correct.
So the SEC school, there's some other things drawing people to the SEC. It's kind of an Americana experience
100%.
as opposed to a pro-Palestinian one, but that's
doubt.
here nor there. Yeah,
100%. And that's why people love it. And I think that's why college football is always going to reign supreme. And honestly, when you watch a college football game on a Saturday with your husband on the couch and Tennessee's playing, at the end of the day, you really don't care how much every single guy on that roster is making.
I'm not watching it, so I don't care anyway. But when he goes and watches it.
Correct. And he doesn't care either. And most fans do not. Now, the second they lose a game for a team or the second they do something that upsets the fan base, then they want to talk about, oh, he's not worth this, he's not worth that. But as a whole, the sport is alive and healthy. More people are watching than ever. What I think is going to be a slippery slope is you are going to see really good players and really good coaches kind of get over-consumed by the negativity of, guys that are just trying to make a quick dime off this. Mm-hmm. And this isn't generational money for the most part for a lot of these kids. They're making significant money, and as a college kid, the money they're making now, I mean, it really should be additive to whatever their experience already is. They're already getting a full ride scholarship from the school, and now they have a chance to make six and seven figures. Like, that's every kid's dream, but it doesn't need to be generational to where you're trying to make your family wealthy during this period too.
Well, it's hard to tell that to an 18-year-old.
100%.
Let's talk about the Tennessee example.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say the last name because I'd butcher it, but there was a lot of controversy that even hit my radar, and I don't really care about college sports.
Yeah.
But the Nico debacle, okay, that obviously was a debacle.
Yeah.
So for those who are not as read in as you are, explain the layman's terms of why that was such a controversy.
Well, I think, look, if you look and go back to just let's talk about year 22. That's when the majority and bulk of Nico's recruitment was going on, and it was March of 2022 when there's an article by The Athletic that came out about a quarterback that's rumored to be going to Tennessee. That's has a deal, a little north of $8 million, right? And in that time, that sum of money was unheard of. Now that's not uncommon. I mean, there's multiple quarterbacks, making $3-4 million annually. College basketball, that's the going rate for a legit guy that's going to go and win you some games. But at that time, that was like, holy cow, we have a kid that is going to make $2.5 million a year in this new era. I mean, NIL had only been a thing for, that time when that article came out, less than a year. And so, obviously he ends up coming to Tennessee. He gets there, becomes a starter last year. And, Tennessee goes and makes a college football playoff. Nico's our quarterback. And then you go throughout the year and you go throughout spring ball. And then the Thursday before the spring game, what was that, coming up on 3 weeks ago? Actually, our Pete Nico said On3 was the first to report it, that Tennessee was in active contract negotiations with Nico Iamaleava and his family about getting a new deal done. And it was unclear if he intended on going in the portal. Well, that caught college football by storm. Longtime reporters and media folks, fans, of Tennessee, fans of college football, and just the stakeholders within college football as a whole. And, putting on another hat of not being a Tennessee fan, we had gotten a lot of slack at On3 for, clickbait and, is this what you guys are really trying to report? And we stood firm on it. We knew what was going on. Pete Nakis, our reporter, had great intel on it and saw it through. And it was a Thursday before the spring game that was supposed to happen on Saturday. And by Friday morning, Nico didn't show up for practice and didn't tell anyone of his teammates, didn't tell anyone of his coaches, and no-showed, on his team, which I have a problem with. I think everyone, your husband, I mean, anyone that's been in and around sports, you think you could just not show up to your job one day just because, you're unhappy about, a discussion you're having with your boss. Like, I think a lot of these kids and the people that they've been surrounded with have kind of lived in these fairy tales and fantasies over the last few years of you can make a lot of money and you can just kind of go through the nuances of showing up to practice, and I don't hear something, I don't like, I'm just going to miss a workout. Like in the NFL, if you don't show up for a workout because you don't like the money you're getting, then you'll have a slip in your locker and you'll never see that building again, right? But in college, it's been tough because it can't be pay for play. These contracts differ from school to school. At the end of the day, you're dealing with 18, 19-year-old kids. I mean, optically, you never want to be the collective or school going and suing a kid, in court that's 18 years old, right?
Well,
I mean, just optically, you don't want that. The tides are changing in that regard, and you've seen that with some athletic directors within the SEC that have put out comments about money they're going to try to recoup, and they're going to enforce these contracts. But Josh Heupel, the head coach at Tennessee, dear friend of mine, he was my coach as well for 2 years. He made the decision the Saturday morning of the spring game after he hadn't heard from his quarterback that they were going to cut ties and go on without him. And so, Nico ended up transferring. He found a home, out at UCLA, for a dollar amount that's rumored to be significantly less than he was making at Tennessee. Ooh. So, his dollar amount that wasn't honored at Tennessee and wasn't honored by any other schools he thought he could get it at, he actually ended up going to a state where he's going to play 50% of it in state income taxes. Yep. Get to live in the beautiful city of Los Angeles and go play football at UCLA, which I'll hold that, but it's hard to believe that's going to be a better experience than playing football in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the SEC.
Let's talk about some of these departments and these athletic departments and these schools trying to recoup some of their money. Do you think that's fair? Well,
I think they've started to take a more structured approach to how these things are handled. I said for the longest time, if college athletics was truly handled like a business, and majority of athletic directors around the country, were to be held to a standard as a CEO of an organization was, there would be a total overhaul of college athletics. Mm-hmm. There's no way that a men's or women's soccer team that operate a deficit every year would be flying on a private plane and getting to eat steaks every night and getting all the same new gear, right? I mean, that's just not how it works, right? I mean, college football, college basketball and baseball, and then some schools women's basketball pays the bills for the whole athletic department, right? And so now that I think the structure is changing to where hopefully if this House settlement passes, the athletic department now in-house institution will be paying the checks for all these kids. So now that there's structure to it, I think a lot of these athletic directors and departments are confident, about, hey, if a kid's not going to live up to his end of the bargain on this, we're going to enforce that. It used to be they were dealing with a third-party collective. We don't really want to sue them. Let's just go our separate ways, shake our hands, and be done with it. We'll get our money and go find someone else that actually wants to be here. But man, like you saw, what happened at Arkansas, and that was actually Nico's brother that had left there. So Nico transferred. A few days later, his brother, who ironically decommitted from UCLA on signing day in December to go to Arkansas, then decided he was going to leave Arkansas after he'd only been there for 4 months, and obviously had made, there's a rumored amount of $200,000 that they're trying to recoup right there.
Yeah.
That they're going to go after. And look, I don't know all the facts in that regard and how that was structured and everything, but good for Arkansas. I mean, I think if anything, and I don't know how it's going to play out, and hopefully it ends amicably, but as a proponent of the sport as a whole, and training young men and women to be stand-up individuals and hold their word. If I'm going to go play football at a school and give my word that I'm going to meet these obligations that this contract lays out, I want to do that and be honorable in that position. And the fact that college football is set up right now to where you can go to a school, have an incredible spring, and within 4 months of committing to a school, getting to know your staff, being on campus for a semester, you can just walk away with no repercussion. Like, that's not how the real world works. And finally, someone's willing to keep it accountable.
If you want to make big boy money, you better be prepared for the big boy way of life, which is
100%.
You might get sued and people are going to come after you, because you can't just have the best of both worlds. And I think that's the part of this. And I'm wondering too, when it comes to some of these kids, the argument is they make this money now, they might get injured, they may never be professional, they may never go on to play in the NBA, the NFL, MLB, whatever. It's like, make your money now because you're using your body and you might get injured. And I get that. Strike while the iron's hot, make your money. I get that. For those that do have a professional career ahead of them, do you think that there's going to be a sense of them going from this, what I would consider being coddled and babied in the college atmosphere with this portal, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this, to then playing professionally? And from my taste of what professional sports is, the coaches and professional sports teams and the front office and stuff, they are not going to coddle your ass like these colleges are.
No.
So what do you think is going to be the impact when these kids waltz in there with their chains on and whatever, and they meet, a big league or a head coach for a professional team that's not treating them like they're a sacred cow?
For sure. And look, I'm not going to speculate on what'll happen in this situation, but I mean, if I was a betting man and had to put money on it, like, I would venture to say that's probably what happened a little bit in the whole Shedeur Sanders aspect of the draft that just happened.
So it wasn't racism?
Everyone always wants to say that, right? It's the quickest thing to say. And you see the prank call situation, and people don't realize that there's a guy that got drafted by the Bills. It may not have been the Bills that got prank called like 5 times throughout the draft about this, but you didn't hear about that story one time. It was a lineman from somewhere. But they want to make the Shedeur, some huge blowout story, and they still are talking about it to this day. But I think that's a prime example of a really talented individual, absolutely, and he's gonna have a shot to go be the guy up in Cleveland. But did the media once again just feed us a lie about who he was and where he was projected to go in the draft? And you saw everything on ESPN and them getting into it on set about where he should go and why he didn't get picked yet. I think there are a lot of NFL teams that look, when you go make an investment to a player, you look at a full picture and a full body of work. It's not just what you can do on the field, right? I mean, they look at, how you are respected and how you treated people in your building. I remember we'd have college scouts always come to us at Tennessee and sit us down during training camp. And they said, we go and watch film for hours on you all and break it down and look how you're on the field. They said, we spend equally as much time going to the academic building and asking your tutors, do you show up on time? How do you treat your professors? What do your professors say about you? We go to your, dietitians and we ask, do you follow your supplement plan? We talk to your trainers about, do you show up to rehab on time? We go to your, leasing office and we'll talk to your, whoever owns the apartment building and talk about, do you pay your rent? And, are you taking care of your apartment? Like all these different things that they do, they're trying to paint and understand, who are we paying millions and millions of dollars to? Are they going to make our organization better or worse? And, I think there's a part of Shedeur that a lot of people, in the national, spotlight just thought, really talented player, surely is going to go in the first round. And, there's been all sorts of reports on, it was a poor interview or there are these other external factors. You listen to the press conference with the Browns personnel, after they select him. They just said, we thought, where we ended up going the 5th round or something. We thought, he had great value in the 5th round. They thought that's where that's what his value is at. And so we decided to take him because we thought we got good value out of him there, and he was going to be overpriced if he had went earlier. And so I think that's hopefully an answer to your question of, college can be a fairy tale. You go to class and you're busy, and you go play football and you make a fat check, and you go do it again. You don't have a mortgage. Most people don't have families. They don't have kids, and they can spend their money and have really no repercussion of it. Heck, they're not getting taxed on any of it. They're all 1099, so they got to be responsible for their own tax bill. Every April, it's not coming out of every check, so you got to manage your budget and put money away. And so I think the fairy tale is going to be over soon for a lot of guys. And, hopefully that it's also more than anything, and I've told people this all along, like I'm hopeful that this era that these kids have been able to live in and be surrounded with surely is, fast track just basic life skills that they might be learning, 2, 3, 4 years out of college, and they're able to, learn that at 18 years old while they're making these huge sums of money, whether that's them going and playing for a professional team and being, coddled, and then going and, meeting a head coach or a GM or an owner that, doesn't put up with any bullshit, or they go and, are working the real world and have to know that, hey, I got to be at the office by 9 a.m. and I got to leave at 5. And, I can't just show up when I don't feel like it. And I can't just, sit out of work for a day just because I didn't like what my coworker said to me yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. It's taking a generation as well that's already got some entitlement issues, and then pouring fuel on that fire and watching it explode. I think it's going to depend on the individual. You just have to hope that they have people around them. And I know you talked about this before about counseling people about, you're making this money, invest this money, don't blow this money, like learn how to manage your finances, learn about who's taking your money, learn if you've got some people around you who got sticky fingers 100%. That are, whatever. It can be a learning experience if you take it that way. Yeah. Or if you don't, it can be a learning experience as well, but not a good one.
And I think that's what has been so sad to see. And we talked about it, at the top of the show when we were talking about just what is this environment like right now. But the sad part is some of the people that are repping the kids in this era are just slimy individuals. And I want to say it in a nicer way, but the stories I hear time and time again of, the folks that are repping these kids, the collective personnel that I hear about how these negotiations are going down. I mean, if and thankfully this is starting to happen, but man, if I was a talented individual, highly recruited, being chased after by a lot of teams, like you're making enough money now to where, you can go have a legit agency, represent you and, handle these negotiations, and in the end make you a lot more money than, your uncle or, 7-on-7 coach who disguises himself as your marketing agent, go and negotiate these, 7-figure deals. And I think, in the Nico situation, I think that's, what was one of the reasons, that negotiations may have turned out, better than how they did is, he didn't really have a set agent. He's one of the highest paid players in college football, and he didn't have a set agent negotiating this. It was, a lot of his father and another individual that's really close to the family. And at the end of the day, if you're an agent in this day and age, what the market rate is, and what you're worth, and your value coming out of a season. And, everyone's always going to want to be more. Just as humans, we're naturally greedy individuals, and, we get something and we want more of it, right? But you're also your value is what someone's willing to pay you, right? And if someone's not willing to pay you, and there's a lot of people not willing to pay you, is it the problem as a whole? Is it the the institution? Is it the is it the industry that's all messed up, or do you need to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm, a messed up individual for thinking that I'm worth 10x what my real market value is?
Yeah, maybe you're part of the problem.
Correct.
Character lessons wrapped up in all of this. Well,
Yeah.
I am reassured that maybe college athletics is not ruined. As we know, I'm such a big college sports fan.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I'm not. I only care about college baseball. But it's important to understand this, because this is economics to me. This is
Right.
capitalism. So that's why I'm so interested in it, and I'm interested in the young generation that we're cultivating and bringing up, because I think that there's a lot of entitlement going around, and I would hope that young people are learning their worth, their value, but also they're learning the character aspect, the financial aspect.
Yeah.
They're learning how to make sound business decisions.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that's wild. A lot of people don't realize, and listeners of your show might not realize, is if you look at the average college football roster, it's now being trimmed down to 105 players. It was at 125. If you look at most of these Power 4 schools out there, you're looking at, in most cases, 80-90% of the roster that's getting paid, and it's not getting paid $500 a month. Majority of these kids are making six figures annually to play college football, and that's on top of their full ride scholarship and their cost of attendance checks, and their on-campus housing and their meals and everything. Like, this is real money that's being poured in. You see the reports that come out, but national championship winning roster last year had a payroll of close to $30 million. That's legit money. And so, we talk about these issues, and people hear us talk about like this industry and what's going on, and people are like, oh, it's NIL, it's going to fizzle out, it's going to become this. Like, this is significant money that's pouring in and out of these programs. That's $30 million getting paid out to a roster, for a college football season. That's not taking, men's basketball. That'll have payroll of $5 to $10 million. Baseball. All these, you're looking at $35-40 million in some regards. That's just going to the student athletes' pockets as a payroll. And so, we'll see what comes about of this House settlement and how that changes up things. It's going to give schools kind of more authority to go through it, and I think that will be good. You'll have college administrators dealing with agents and negotiating deals.
Wow.
I think the schools are going to provide a lot of resources, financial literacy, tax prep, and kind of can bundle that into some real life education. And I think they've all been trying to do it now, but you have all these people in the ears of these kids trying to tell them to do it a zillion different ways, from their agent to the collective, and now that's all in house. I think you could kind of streamline it. But then you go to kind of the next phase of, okay, now that schools are paying kids, how does like real change come about? Because at the end of the day, these kids still aren't employees. So, you can't necessarily put a cap on it, because, we live in the United States of America, the greatest country ever. And, you don't want to be capped on how much you can make. I don't want to be capped on how much I can make. And, unless there's, a union or some type of collective bargaining or an employment structure around it, at the end of the day, these kids are just 1099 employees or 1099 contractors, on the payrolls of these universities, while also being students of the university as well. Like, if you look from 30,000 feet on like the structure of how this is, you have 18-year-old, student that is, paying, if you're a walk-on, potentially paying $40,000 a year to go to Tennessee, but then you're also getting a check from the university to play football. Like, it's the most convoluted thing I've ever seen, and then you've mixed financial aid into it and all the different things. But you say there's never a dull time, and it's the Wild West. It is, because even though we can get to kind of this next landmark, which could be, this rev share era of this House settlement, there's still kind of another phase I think we would enter into after that, which is what is the holistic kind of guardrails and parameters that guide this whole era moving forward. Because if we say anything, the NCAA is never going to do anything that's right. So they're going to keep screwing it up. They're always going to get sued. And, who's going to be kind of the first to lead the charge to, either strip college football away from the NCAA and make its own governing body, do away with the NCAA as a whole and abolish it. There's always these conversations that get started. They end up going nowhere on kind of what's next. But, at some point, they're going to have to put some sort of general structure onto this. There's too much money at hand for there not to be.
Yeah. Well, the next time I have you in, I want to talk about the impact this is going to have on children and parents, because I think there are a lot of parents out there that are looking at their 6-year-old.
No doubt. They can get rich.
And that might be a whole other beast.
100%.
That's going to create some monsters that
sure.
I'm a little worried about. I feel
Absolutely.
like, parents are already sometimes overzealous, stage moms and dads.
Or you look on the other side of it, you're Bill Belichick, and you go find a 25-year-old girlfriend to keep you sane during this era.
to keep you sane. I don't know. I don't know if that's sane. I wish we had time to get to that, but maybe next time. On3, everyone should go check it out because obviously business is booming and you've got plenty to talk about.
Sure
Thank you for always coming in and breaking this down for me and having the conversation and trying to educate, you know, the rising stars of tomorrow about financial literacy and athletics.
That's
I
all
always
we do.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Tomi.
much.
Appreciate it.
All right, folks, I hope that you are as educated coming out of that as I am. I am now an NIL expert, maybe, slightly, semi. Thanks for watching. Very special episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. Don't forget, you can always watch Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern on Outkick. Of course, on Fox Nation, on the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care.